Peace. Abarigani, Islam, Salam, Hetepu, and Rahubat. Gino Lago Ninani, Chief Noble Bandele, El-Amin, back again for another video. And today's video, we're going to be discussing the Social Security number and its religious exemption. Okay. So I'm going to try to talk about what I've learned on how to basically get exempt from having a Social Security number, or what ways that you need to try to get around using a Social Security number if you don't have one, or if you're trying not to use it. Okay, so we're going to get into that. But before we get into all that, please check out my information. If you need to get in contact with anything, we do weddings, anything, funerals, any rites of passage, if you want to say, affidavits of birth, affidavits of marriage. Give me a call if you need any counseling or any of these things. If you have been enjoying the videos, hey, check me out. Cash at me a donation to keep things going, and we'll shout you out as well. Also, if you want to get my email, or if you need to check out our website, that's what it is. Indigenousservices.webs.com is the one-stop shop for indigenous and Moorish legal lawful services. Okay, so please check out that stuff and get back with me if you need to. Where am I going? All right. The other part of it is also you can check out all my books on Amazon.com as well, from Moorish Treaties to Indigenous Manual for Life, Nationality, Birthright, and Jurisprudence, Moabite Man, yada, yada, yada. I have several books, so check me out on Bandele El-Amin on Amazon. All right. And now we're going to get into the video. So today's video, like I said, we're going to talk about the Social Security and the exemptions. And, I'm just going to go briefly over some of these issues. Like, we're going to talk about the Religious Act, dealing with religion, because we also understand that the temple, Moorish Temple of New Kemet, along with all other religious organizations, can do this as well. But under the Moorish Temple of New Kemet, our primary religious practice is through ancestral worship, and using that as the universal religious mode. It's important for Moors, indigenous people, or whatnot that are trying to practice their way of life, and how they're going to do it. And like we've talked all the time, it's religion. I can't really stress it enough. But if you have a religious order, then you really need to use that religious order to protect your rights, or what we, exempt you from having to do certain things. One of the things is the Social Security number. A lot of times we understand that the Social Security number is kind of what ties you back into their jurisdiction. So, anytime you are using the Social Security number, then you are under their jurisdiction, especially in that particular subject. So, if you're using it for your job, then, you under the guidelines of it. If you use it to get a driver's license, well, then, you're under the guise of that Social Security number. So, as a lot of Moors do not use Social Security numbers or practice because of their religious views, like many other religious groups that do not. And so we're going to show you some of that, as far as how certain religious groups use the exemption of Social Security to move around still. Okay. So let's look at the religious objections to use Social Security numbers on tax return. Because one of the big things is, you want to not have, you don't have a Social Security number for your child. Say you have a child, You don't get a birth certificate. You get a birth affidavit, and then say you don't want to necessarily get a social security number, but you want to still be able to, file taxes on your child and get the child, get the money from your dependents. You know what I'm saying? And so that becomes the difficult part, is when you're trying to get the dependents and trying to subject, put them under that, because you kind of putting them in the crosshairs, if you will, or you kind of putting them, they want you to put them back in the jurisdiction to claim them. Okay. So you got to understand that. Right here, so it talks about the social security numbers have been required on tax returns since the 1960s. Number of citizens who have religious obligations, religious objections to participation in what we call social insurance systems. So understand that Social Security is a commercial venue, and it is social insurance systems. Okay. And Congress has chosen to accommodate certain groups. Separately, there are other citizens who have religious objections to being identified by government provided numbers, such as security numbers. But to date, Congress has not chosen to accommodate their beliefs. Okay, so the paper goes into a history of the requirements to use Social Security number. So, this is kind of what their argument has been on why you don't use Social Security numbers. Okay, it says, we look at here, because just shortly, look right here, before I get all the way down here, basically in 96, you had to start supplying dependents taxpayer identification numbers. It was made part of the requirement for claiming dependency. So prior to 1996, you didn't have to have a Social Security number to, you didn't have to have a Social Security number to claim children. So in a sense, it's like, if you didn't have to have it before, why you got to have it now, where to the point where it's totally necessary, when there was a time when you did not. That was within the past 20, 30 years, you see. So that's going to be something to think about. But anyway, so the exemption from participating in Social Security based on religion. There are a number of United States citizens who have religious objections to participation in the system. Okay, some of them have been accommodated by Social Security laws. Okay, allows, but this is IRS code, basically. The IRS code allows an exemption from Social Security Self-Employment Act to members of certain religious sects, which are consciously opposed to private or public insurance. Okay, so the key here is when you do, what we've seen right now is insurance. Okay, religions have a record of being opposed to a social insurance or an insurance, a public, private or a public. Okay, they're opposed to it, and which make provisions to care for their dependent members. So, when they got something that they got to buy into that's outside of their own group, it becomes a problem, because they're like, we can take care of ourselves. If you give us the ability to take care of ourselves, we'll do that. We don't have to take social services, social insurances, in order to maintain ourselves. Okay, because side note, Social Security was set up to take care of you. It is an insurance. It's like life insurance. It's set up to take care of you, or take care of the loved one, or whoever's taking claim out when that person's gone. And so Social Security is supposed to take care of you once you reach a certain age of maturity. Okay. So anyway, it says that take care of their members, allow certain ministers, members of religious orders, and Christian Science practitioners who are opposed to the acceptance of Social Security benefits because of religious principles to avoid self-employment taxes on income from their performing religious services. So basically, they're like, if you're performing religious services, you shouldn't have to use a social security number to do that, and you shouldn't be taxed on that. And we also know we all know that a lot of religious institutions are tax free. A lot of times it's 501c3s, but just in general, a religious organization can be tax free. Okay, so with that being said, I'm thinking what I've come and thought was that pretty much what you do and how you move should be through the temple. Like, you should do everything through your temple. That makes everything you do religious. And whatever temple you are part of, that temple should be able to set themselves up that they can provide these accommodations, or at least on paper, they're able to provide accommodations and provide for their members as if instead of having to get a social service from the state. Okay. So as it said, in 1982, Supreme Court held that without explicit statutory exemption, an employee who qualified for the IRC self-employment exemption on his own income could not use his religious beliefs to avoid paying Social Security on the wages of his employees who were members of the same sect and who shared his religious objection to Social Security. So it says that, now the key is here, an employer. Now understand that an employer is going to be somebody who has a business. So if you got a business, you pretty much, that business, if it's not religious, okay, if it's not under religious banner, it's you're going to be under the jurisdiction of the state. So when they're using the term employer, that's letting you know that that's part of the state jurisdiction. Okay, period. If they have the state now, because it's an employer, it's a company, and that company is registered. You see, that's how it's the terminologies that's being used. An employer is a terminology that you would use like that. So if you self-employed exemption and you're using the terms employee, you got a corporation, you got a company, this would not be applicable. Okay, you'd have to use a religious entity. So you'd have to be talking about your minister told you this, or this, your minister would be your employer in a sense. Okay, so I don't want to get too far, but I want you to understand that you have to use religion or religious terminology, and you'd have to have a religious setup. It had to be under a religious corporation in order to benefit from the exemption in that way. Or as King El-Amin has discussed, the art of contracting, okay, which we will get into, but you can also check out King El-Amin on his videos dealing with contracts, because he's got a lot of video on contracts. So with that being said, I'm okay. I don't want to get all into this, but I did want to look at the 1402 that they talked about. That 1402 was dealing with the employment, and I just wanted to show you that is an Internal Revenue Code exemption. Any individual may file an application in such manner and with such official as may be prescribed by regulations under this chapter for an exemption from the tax imposed by this chapter. If he is a member of a recognized religious sect or division, see, now you got to look at recognized. What's recognized? Are all entities recognized? All religious entities are not necessarily recognized, and going in there as a spiritual person that's not recognized as a religion. So realize that you got to deal with as a member of a recognized religious sect or a division thereof, and is adherent to established tenets or teachings of such sect or division, by reason of which he is conscientiously conscientiously opposed to acceptance of the benefits of any private or public insurance which makes payments in the event of death, disability, old age, or retirement, or makes payments toward the cost of or provides services for medical care. Such exemptions may be granted only if the application contains or accompanied by. So, like I was saying before, is that if you have benefits, if you're claiming benefits from your religious entity, such exemptions may be granted. And so it's saying that if granted only if the application contains or accompanied by, it says, such evidence of such individual's membership in and adherence to the tenets of the teachings, therefore thereof, as the secretary may require for purposes of determining such individual compliance with preceding sentence, and his waiver of all benefits and other payments, okay, under the Social Security Act. So, wavering, officially wavering your benefits and a evidence of a membership of that particular temple, and having his teachings or whatnot as an example. So that is one. These are basically arguments to be understood and used when you're dealing with the Social Security. Okay, the IRS is separate from Social Security, but yet they are coherent with each other. And so, a lot of times when you get something from the IRS, you got to use a Social Security number. Social Security number is a tax identification number, and so is an ITIN or EIN or any of those other entities that is needed a number for. But notice that you get all other numbers from the IRS versus Social Security. But Social Security number is a tax identifying number. Okay, so with that being said, I'm just saying that they're all connected. So let's look. There was something else that I wanted to talk about quickly. Let's see. Okay, I wanted to talk about this: the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Okay, it was enacted in '93. It requires that a statute or regulation of general applicability not burden a person's free exercise of religion unless it is essential to further a compelling governmental interest, and does so by the least restrictive means. This is essentially the test for which the dissenters argue. Okay, and this would be good to look at. For time purposes, I'm not gonna get into Bowen versus Roy. We might do a video just on that, but that is the go-to for looking at how they deal with Social Security and exemption, religious exemption. Okay, it says the purpose of this Religious Freedom Restoration Act was to restore the interpretation of the Free Exercise Clause prior to the Supreme Court decision in Employment Division Oregon Department of Human Resources versus Smith. It says, since Bowen and Roy predates that decision, it may be that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was not intended to affect that. Okay, blah, blah, blah. So that's really another big a big thing is looking at the Freedom Restoration Act. And I want to say I had something else on it, but I'm trying to look for the whole definition of it. I mean, because the Freedom Restoration Act, it does make it where you have to show that it's a burden to the free exercise of religion. So that's another, and that's another key terminology is a burden. So if the Social Security number is a burden, and that's the argument, okay. Now I'm giving you what the argument also would be against this whole concept. Okay, it says lower courts reviewing challenges to Social Security tax laws requiring the furnishing of Social Security numbers have assumed the constitutionality of the act. It says it has held that government has a compelling interest in collecting of the tax and has stated that payment or Social Security number requirement at issue was the least restrictive means of furthering that interest. A number of taxpayers have litigated their religious objection to supplying a dependent Social Security number in order to claim dependency exemption for a child. So, that's the argument that, they've been arguing since 96, that why should we need a Social Security number? Okay. Now, the court, this is where the court also examines statutory accommodations of religious opposition to participation in the Social Security system. And this is what they found, and found that a general religious exemption to Social Security number requirement would have a far greater impact on administration of the dependency exemption and would increase the risk of fraudulent claims being made. The court ruled that using alternate numbers, which the parents had proposed, which is what he talked about, would not serve the purpose of being able to cross-match a series of unique identifiers. So the court kind of pushed back and pushes back in that argument. That's the argument. They're saying, hey, well, Social Security, the way they got it set up, is such, other numbers won't work in their system. It would undermine the whole setup, basically, of Social Security system. And so it would be, so exemption from that and using another number, we don't see it. Also, it increases the risk of fraudulent claims being made, which they try to claim, they have so many a year. So like that's the issue if you're dealing with it from that angle. You have to see that argument. Now, to show something else to kind of, I'm not gonna say combat, but to kind of answer that, I want to look at certain, like we said earlier, certain religious groups, they do have religious exemption. Okay, so when we look at this, the Social Security Department, okay, 2011 talks about Amish and the Mennonites and other religious exempt communities. So there are other religious exempt communities that they talk about. Now, the background related to the enumeration of the Amish and the Mennonites. Okay. Now listen, the Social Security amendments of 65 and 67 provided an exemption from some aspects of coverage for those individuals who are members of religious sects that make provisions for their dependent members. See, once again, it says to be eligible for the provisions of the law, an individual must file an IRS 4029 application for exemption from Social Security and Medicare taxes and waiver of benefits. Okay, so this is letting you know that in some form or fashion, Social Security does have an application. Okay, and it says, and be jointly certified under the SSA and IRS for a discussion of religious exemption of taxes and waiver of benefits. Okay, it says see the method of obtaining exemption and general information. So it basically, it says that it says effective on the 2004, any IRS 420 received by SSA that does not include an SSN will be returned to an individual to obtain an SSN. This must be accomplished by following the same routine in immigration. So basically, and this is what they've been saying, it's like for you to get exemption, what you do is you still, like, you get a Social Security number, but then you file your you file the 4029 claiming exemption. And so what happens is that the Social Security number will not be used. You won't get a Social Security card or any of those things. Okay, so I'm trying to see. Okay, right here it says exemption. Okay, it says some applicants may file for SSNs with no reference to the IRS process or without expressing serious religious objections. Other applicants may express religious concerns and want to state officially that the only reason they are applying for the number is to control the IRS 4029, and that they do not want a Social Security card mailed to them. In some religious communities, these are called control numbers. Okay, so if you ever heard that term, in certain communities, they don't even call it a Social Security number because they don't use it, or it's not given to them. It's not given to them directly. They call it control numbers and not SSNs. And individuals who have these numbers may insist that they do not have SSN for other purposes, such as obtaining identification with NVA. Okay, so it's like the Social Security Department still, in order to claim this exemption from this particular formula, you file for your 4029, you write and make provision saying that this is not to be used for anything else except for controlling the 4029. Okay, so with that being said, if you did have that number for the control of the 4029, then let's just say, for example, if you're trying to get what they call an ITIN number, you could get an ITIN number possibly because showing that you do have a Social Security number, but it's not to be used and it's only for religious purposes, meaning that you're not eligible for anything else. And so that's just a side note, but it says follow these procedures only when the individual expresses a religious objection to being issued an SSN card. For those who express concern and indicate they only want to file for an SSN for 4029 purposes, use the following instructions. Okay. So it gives you why we are suppressing an original card. Suppress the insurance of the card. So now right here, if you don't have a Social Security number, that's one thing. But for all of us who were born into a system that has a Social Security number, we never file our 4029 to suppress it because that's one way to That's one way to get rid of the number in its use publicly. So like after you get a 4029 and it's accepted, then you could basically go out here to the banks or go wherever you're gonna go and do business and say that I don't have a social security number to be used for that. And then you could show your acceptance from the 4029 saying that I got religious exemption, so I can't use my social security number to get a bank card. And at that point, they could issue you whatever they need to do. Okay. If an applicant requests that we suppress it, suppress the insurance. You see, that's the thing. You can suppress the insurance of the card, which is the main issue that religious people have, is that they don't want to be under a social insurance thing. So with that being said, that if they was to get, so, and the reason why I mentioned ITIN is because ITIN is not a social insurance like the social security number. Social security number is basically there. It's set up for you, and they put money. It's like when you work, you pay Social Security, and that goes to your retirement. That's an insurance. When you get an ITIN, that is only for the purposes of being identified tax in a tax situation. Okay. So, and the only reason why a lot of people will want to get a ITIN is because if you don't want to use a social security number because you don't want to enact it, and because once you enact it, then you are under it. But as long as you got it suppressed and got it under religious, then it's kind of tied up. So it's being tied up in that situation. You can't use it. You get an ITIN, and then you use that number to file for taxes. So if you have a child or for yourself, you get an ITIN for tax purposes, and it's not for insurance. So you're not taking any kind of service or any obligation to anything under the ITIN. So that's what we got going today. So I hope you guys enjoyed this information, and please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and please subscribe to the channel. We need that. So that is pretty much it. So until the next time, Tutanana. Peace.